Are you struggling to maintain stable blood sugar levels and improve overall health? Have you tried different strategies but they didn't work? Do you feel overwhelmed by the conflicting information about diabetes management, longevity, and lifestyle changes? My name is Gamden, a holistic wellness coach, the host of the Thriving with Diabetes podcast. I help people with type 2 diabetes achieve diabetes remission and avoid complications so they can live healthier, happier, and longer lives. In this episode of the Thriving with Diabetes podcast, we are joined by Daniel Tausan, a personal research scientist. Together, we explore critical aspects of diabetes management, from longevity and the impact of physical activity to the role of mindset and the potential benefits of intermittent fasting. We hope you find this discussion helpful for diabetes, overall health, and longevity. Enjoy this episode and make sure to subscribe and follow us for more expert tips and strategies to thrive with diabetes. Daniel, welcome to the Thriving with Diabetes podcast.
Thank you, Kamada. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Let's start this episode by talking about longevity. We know longevity refers to living longer and healthy life, which is remarkably relevant for people with diabetes. My question is, how can people with diabetes or other health issues improve their longevity, and what are the key lifestyle factors that contribute to living a longer and healthier life?
That's a great question there, Gamada. So, for individuals living with diabetes, to have that quality and long life, really what they need most is some emotional motivation, some driver, something they've tied into to put them on a course where they want that, where they definitely want to be there for the people around them. And the example I have is with a gentleman that it's been over a decade since I've met him and worked with him, that he didn't really care about being healthy. There was nothing that you could tell him to put him on the right course, to do the actions, to make sure that he lives a little longer. For him was, I'm going to enjoy it while I'm here, and I don't really care about the last couple of years. And he has 3 kids, and when his first grandchild was born, it dawned on him that he wants to be there for this little baby's life, more so than his own kids. So, this is something that I think is very rarely talked about, of these, emotional drivers that really get us invested in changing our behavior, changing our habits. And habits are really the name of the game when it comes to diabetes. We get used to, we get comfortable with certain things in life, and those habits end up pulling us day in, day out, and never having enough pull or emotional tug to steer that habit into a different course. One of my favorite analogies for our habit energy is that it's a horse that's running. And there's a story within, I believe, Zen, that goes something along the lines of a man's running on the back of a horse going really fast through town. And a stranger yells, "Hey, where are you off to in such a hurry?" And the man replies, "I don't know, ask the horse." And that's a bit how we are in today's day, where our habits are pulling us along. And for a healthy, long life, it's a very simple process. It's free. Everything about it comes in with that connection back to our emotions and to our symptoms, and cutting off what we put as our beliefs into what we think is right and wrong. And one of the big problems within diabetes is, in the last 100 years, there's this idea we have to constantly eat to have energy. And that's definitely not the case. There's no animal that's going to starve out or have, call it, nutrient deficiencies if it doesn't eat for a day. Yet we have linked energy with food, immediate food, which is quite pleasurable. And so this is the big, this is the big hurdle to really overcome for people with diabetes, but for anybody, the overconsumption. Because on the scientific findings over the last, 5 decades even, it doesn't matter what animal model you take. You can take a worm, you can take a mouse, you can take a rabbit, you can take a dog, you can look at primates, and then even humans, which are notoriously difficult to study, but even in humans, there's plenty of evidence to showcase that when you restrict how much food you consume, and you consume it within regimented windows of eating, the lifespan and the health span increases for every single creature. And there's these molecular markers that tell us this, from how the DNA looks, right? From genomic stability to how stable is the protein, it's called the proteome, around that DNA. How well can the proteome protect the DNA? This is your antioxidant defense. This is your nutrient sensing. These are all the proteins that give us the superpowers of being human. So that part becomes very stable when we do this process of allowing our body pause between food. Because as we'll get into it, eating and this process of taking the outside world and converting it into you. I eat a mango, it becomes Daniel. It becomes my skin, it becomes my liver, it becomes my part of my connective tissue. And so this process isn't, call it, easy. It's taxing. It requires effort. It requires a signaling cascade, and this is when we're the most vulnerable. So when we consume food, you can think, I'm turning matter that's outside of me into matter that's a part of me, and other things can hitch a ride at that time. Things we might not want. And so this is where the process of allowing pause turns on our elimination and our buffer systems to be able to clear those unwanted contents out. So, that would be where I would get started, is, find that motivation for what really drives and keeps you here, which is often family, family and people that we love. And then, have that insight of what biology are we responsible to respect. Intermittent fasting has become quite the fad and talked about, and I'm happy it's come to the surface for call it the mainstream, but that's far away from real fasting. I think intermittent fasting would be better called the default respectful way of treating your biology, treating your body.
Brilliant. Very interesting information. Thank you for sharing that. This is the first time to hear that when we talk about longevity, emotional motivation is key here. That is a pro tip. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned what it goes against longevity or health is when we keep eating all day. Is that correct?
Well, there's definitely a price to pay if you eat all day. From, let's say, 8 o'clock when you wake up, you then snack before noon, you have your lunch, then you have something else within the midday, then you have dinner, then you have a snack before you go to bed. It's not a matter if, but just when you'll start having problems. And you'll see that individuals that do that type of behavior, where they're constantly eating throughout the day, they'll have a lot of allergies or immune issues. They'll get sick often. And people that take a different lifestyle, it's just simple as, and they're not even eating, I would say, perfectly, or call it the super healthy diet. But what they do is they respect the time. They say, okay, I'll eat twice a day or once a day, and they'll have a big window. They can consume liquids, other things, but the idea is non-caloric substances or very low insulin response substances, which we can talk about. And they don't get sick. They haven't been sick in like 6 years. And people say, oh, it's genetics, but it's not. They had terrible 20s and 30s where they made, they constantly get, pneumonia and other infections and bronchitis. And now when they've had the opportunity to, what I'd say is, get the real education that is missed out on, because few people have, I would say, a keen, genuine interest in all the nitty-gritty details of science. It's tedious, I get it, right? But, it's very nice to be able to find someone you trust that's going to translate all those details in such a way that you're comfortable enough to be able to navigate it, And so one thing that's done by marketing very well is that they've painted it out that genetics is this culprit for all your health problems, which by far it's absolutely not, And I always wonder when someone says, oh, my heart problem's genetic. What do you mean by that? Did you figure it? Did you do the hardcore heavy duty science to figure it out? Because if you did, you should be, on par of getting a Nobel Prize, because it's not an easy feat. Because the reality of the matter is 98% of us, we come with a complete genome set up to have perfect health. Now, we might have, call it a sensitivity to mess up our sugar metabolism, or we might have a sensitivity to mess up, let's say, something within the brain or easy oxidize. But if you live according to, let's say, the very simple biological principles, that we can talk about here, is that you don't have to get a disease. But that's not the normal way. It might be common today, but that's not normal for a human being to be experienced this much disease. And I do think marketing has been really the culprit to drive people away from being able to even recognize what science is anymore, right? Science is very simple. It's what you can observe, measure, and predict. And I see that today when I talk to very smart people, very educated people, very high thriving, what we call very successful individuals, they haven't had what I would say a sentinel present when they're being exposed to all the marketing. And so, the ideas seep in like, well, I have to drink milk. Where am I going to get my calcium? When if you just pull up a table of, what foods have calcium, calcium is in everything. How does a plant have its structure? How does it stay upright? It's using calcium. What about if you eat meat? For the people that enjoy meat, which is a large portion of our population, the only way muscles can contract is they're loaded with calcium. So, that's just a small example, but, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's marketing. Funny enough, I have kids, that I work with athletes, and they're like, hey, I don't like eating in the morning. It makes me feel sick. And I was like, well, either don't eat, drink your fluids, drink a lot of things, make sure you have, something that makes you feel good, and then wait till you get genuinely hungry. Listen to your hormones. But, there's this notion that comes in, like, if you don't eat, you're not going to have energy. And that's also now a little bit of what I would say a ghost in the language. The ghost is where the person is saying energy, but the energy is on you. That's your fat. That's your glucose in your blood. That's the glycogen in your liver. You have plenty of energy. What they're referring to is accessing energy. But if you eat, you're going to delay your access to energy. It might make you feel comfortable. And that's what most individuals are doing. They're making themselves feel comfortable for the moment. But the funny thing is just the moment you go past ever so slightly the little bit of discomfort, you now get into a state of being, what I would say, extremely resilient. You have vitality, you have energy. You have the energy that you were thinking you were going to get from eating. And so this is where some of the, call it, very easy to digest fruits. That's a great way when you're like, hey, I think I need to eat, but I'm not very hungry. A small piece of fruit tells you right away whether you actually want to eat or not. And there's a very key thing when we eat food, when we think about longevity. How do we eat for longevity? We've forgotten a little bit about the sequence of eating. And in what's important in the sequence of eating, and it's very simple, the thing that passes the fastest needs to be eaten first. So fruit is the best to eat on an empty stomach. It'll pass through our system first. We don't want to eat something like, the heavy carbohydrates, the pasta, the breads, and then slam a lot of fruit on top of that. Because now the fruit is not being able to pass, it's getting held out and obstructed, which is going to slow down within the intestines, which is going to stay there longer than it wants to. It's going to start fermenting, it's going to start causing gas and bloating. And over time, once it's not a problem, but when this becomes habit, it starts disrupting how the organs need to work. They need to work within a beautiful synchronicity with everything else. And this ends up leading to, the gut having, perforations or small little leaks, which then gets us to reabsorb contents, which then comes out in our skin or in different areas, or it spills out in our immune system, and now we start having allergic conditions. And so eating is by far our biggest challenge today. What I see is health. People get the idea, okay, I have to do exercise, but the funny part is you need to do way less exercise than what the fitness industry with the marketing is suggesting to you. Where I've interviewed and met centurions, 104-year-old lady. She's never hit the weights ever, but she walks every single day. Every single day she's out walking. So walking is good enough to make it to 100. But obviously, if you want to have a little bit more quality of life, you want to feel strong, you want to have good bones, you want to have, then resistance training is going to help, right? But they're just making sure we clear what's in front of us. We know what we're really going on, and what we're going to tackle. If we want that, this is what we got to do. We got to do a little bit of resistance training, and that's what I would recommend with anyone with diabetes. Is that though the cardio, the aerobic exercise will help burn through energy and help reestablish the energy expenditure with consumption, the resistance training helps to build muscle mass, which can very, very favorably help shift the metabolism back into a healthy state.
Before you continue watching this episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to book a call with me. If you are looking for personalized support to manage diabetes effectively and take control of your health, visit wellnessimpact.org to schedule your call today. Back to the episode. Brilliant. We will come to to talk about physical activity, and before that, I want to discuss health and market, how it influence our decisions. But great. I'm not sure if you mentioned that about 1% of the health issues are genetics. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And when I would say about 5 to 2%, and you have to, your sample population matters where you're looking at. Some places might have a little bit more exposure to chemicals, which might affect the genetics that's at play there. But when there is a genetic component, and when there's a genetic issue, it's known very early, and normally those genetic conditions were called inborn errors of metabolism, and they're very devastating, right? One's called PKU, for example, where we have issues with metabolizing phenylalanine, and that enzyme itself is not functioning. So, when there is a genetic condition, usually there is a very drastic functional consequence. But if you have, for example, a sluggish protein, but it can still do the required job, then that doesn't mean that you can now get the disease. You just have to live within that, call it, limitation. But as we're seeing, with each, call it, year, as we're learning more about the molecular details of the cell, we have the ability, based off our actions, to interact with the genome, saying what genes do we want to express in our cells. And our actions have everything to say about whether we're going to end up getting Alzheimer's, whether we're going to get the diabetes or the Crohn's. These diseases are diseases of really the developed world. Outside of the developed world, we don't see them in this high prevalence. And so that's really begs the question is, what are we doing wrong? What can we get away with? What do we need to reevaluate? And genetics is a part, but it's not, genetics may predispose you, but it's not predetermined. That's how I would say it.
Okay, that's fine. Because some people might refer the health issue to genetics, or because my parents or my family were suffering from this condition or that condition. But we're talking only about a small percentage.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit there to clarify, because there's a key distinction to make When we say genetics, we're referring to is the source code, the code that we use as the informational system for all the protein, all the, call it biological complexity. But when I live, let's say I live a very healthy life, I'm going to pass on a set of controlling the genes, proteins, that will dictate how easy it is for my child to become fit. And I can do the exact opposite. I could really abuse my body. I can, put myself in a terrible health state. Now, I'm going to pass on still genes that are functional, but they're going to be in a very susceptible state. They're not going to be this, call it, coming out very easy to build muscle. It actually might be very hard to build muscle. And so genetics do play a role, but we have decisions to alter our bloodline. And for example, genetics do have for myself, when I work with, for example, Hispanic versus someone that's, African descent. So Hispanics, for whatever reason, we don't know, but we know for a fact that they can abuse sugars and carbohydrates more than any other race. For whatever reason it's harder for them to mess up their metabolism, to switch it to a state that's disease. They still can, obviously, but less so than the other races. Now, someone that's of African origin with that genome, I'm a little bit more concerned with their kidneys and their blood pressure, because for whatever reason they can push that blood pressure higher than the other races. Now, obviously, there's this probability, there's individual variation, but on a general statistic, this is what we see. So genetics do play a role, but there's a way to be able to understand what we're saying when we're saying genetics. There's a way to be able to change what small little portions of it get passed on, which is the best way to, the analogy is your genome is like a guitar, like an instrument. So human beings are a guitar, a dog's a violin, right? A frog is a harmonica. And how you play that guitar, how you tune it, is the expression, the song that comes out, and it's the human being that then manifests in front of us. And so you have to keep playing that guitar nicely throughout your entire life. If you don't, you're going to get really bad sounds. You're going to get bad, call it, experiences in terms of your health. And the bad experiences are part. We're going to make mistakes, but if we stop listening to the song we're playing, we're not going to be able to fine tune it in such a way to get that perfect melody where we're living in harmony with our biology and with the nature outside us.
Brilliant. Very interesting information. Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about health and marketing. And health, science, and marketing often influence the choices that people with diabetes make regarding their health condition. How does marketing influence the health decisions for people with diabetes? When I was talking to you earlier, I have given you just one example. When we look at the labels or the packages, sometimes it says healthy, and you feel the rest, and you will find it's not. That is one example.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's a challenge for, obviously with individuals with diabetes, and it's a challenge for anybody today on the planet, where, the market can get away with putting almost anything on the label, and they're not going to get called out. It's not going to get pulled off the shelves just because it's a little bit misleading. They have to put what the ingredients are on the back of the package, but they can put any sort of lingo they want in order to be able to advertise to whoever they think they can sell to. And so one great example is like Honey Nut Cheerios. That's great for heart health, and they'll say for metabolic, diabetes, they'll try to market cereals. But there's absolutely no, do not consume milk, do not consume refined carbohydrates, do not consume cereal, period, if you have diabetes. That I would take you, if you work with me, I would take you instantly off of those foods. And that's because you don't want foods that are going to, one, be a drastic spike to insulin, but two, that are bringing in an incredible amount of sugar right away at the beginning of the day. Unless you're going to go run a marathon, this isn't the diet that's meant for you. And so this is quite a problem. I do think that this needs to come at really a society base where there needs to be a push for, an audit. There needs to be individuals that are in charge of not only, I would say, auditing what's allowed on the shelves, but also, making sure that the science that's sound, right? Because people, I think, need to know that you can buy science. So you can, for example, see a graph saying the healthiest food for kids, and Honey Nut Cheerios is the third food that's recommended as super healthy for kids. I wonder who paid for that graph. I wonder who paid for that study. Like, what are they even measuring? So this is the reality we live in, right? Like, money does really drive a lot of what's going to happen in terms of, manpower, in terms of, what's going to be done. And, this is where the social structure that people have is absolutely key. Because if you have someone like me in your social structure, well, you'd know right away. I wouldn't let that slide. If you're in my midst, I'd feel obligated, a responsibility, a duty to share that information. And we don't have within our social structures enough people, I'd say, call it the discomfort or pushing the boundaries to keeping us in check with what's going to be good for us in the long run, out of a non-egotistic way. Like, I'm not trying to be right. I would just like to see less suffering, and I do know that, for example, you can pick up any of the packages that are, call it refined foods. Pretty much all the refined foods someone with diabetes should avoid, right? If that packaging has a few preservatives in it, you don't want that. You want food that's going to very quickly pass through your system and reestablish the hormone called ghrelin to control your hunger. And so when we eat a lot of these foods that have preservatives in them, one, they slow down digestion. Two, they paralyze our nervous system in the gut. The nervous system in the gut's called the enteric nervous system. And that nervous system is very sensitive to disruption, where if we paralyze it, that squeezing motion of the gut stops. That peristalsis doesn't do a beautiful job of moving contents through, so it slows down our gut even more. And it doesn't have to paralyze or interact with the nervous system to slow it down. Something like guar gum, which is present in tons and tons of packaged foods, slows down the passage of food. And that might sound like, hey, that shouldn't be that big of a deal. But again, we have compounding effects that's going to, really result into disrupting the organs as they need to work. And the digestive organs are really the key ones to target when it comes to, the chronic conditions, and diabetes does definitely fall into that.
Brilliant. Do you recommend for people to read labels before they buy foods?
That is a must. In today's day, you must read the label before you consume anything. And, if you look at Skittles, there is titanium dioxide in Skittles. Why there's titanium dioxide in Skittles, I don't know. I don't know why you would put that. Obviously, it helps, hold, call it, the shape, or so that nothing, wants to eat the Skittle outside of us. But titanium dioxide is a very potent oxidizing agent, right? And maybe that's a little bit too much jargon, but really what that does is it rusts you from the inside. It accelerates aging to an unbelievable pace. And so why would you consume that? And so if it's in Skittles, then that's, that kids are eating that in like left, right, and center. That's sort of a failed diligence on us as adults. And in today's day, if you're not reading the label, you're going to be consuming things that are going to disrupt your health. And the ones that are the biggest disruptors is going to be the endocrine disruptors, something that's going to disrupt the way that your thyroid functions, your liver functions, the big glands in your body are going to get targeted. Those are the most sensitive to these chemicals that are in our food products. And people can look, for example, in North America. So US has one type of regulation, Canada has another, UK has another. UK is better than Canada. Canada is better than US. US has way more chemicals than ever should be allowed in food products. But it doesn't mean any of them are, call it, perfect with any, what's put on the shelf. Here, in Canada and America, if you pick up a food, something that you're about to interested in, it can be great. Usually it has very few ingredients, and it can be very healthy. And then right next to it can be complete, absolute abysmal, garbage that you're consuming equivalent.
Thank you for that great information. So reading labels is a must for everyone. Thank you for sharing that Uh, Earlier, you talked a little bit about physical activity, and I know you don't get involved too much in this. But, there are some recommendations to be active and uh, to improve the physical health as well when it comes to uh, fitness, not just going to the gym.
Yeah, so I mean, my background is I was a national water polo athlete, so I had quite the background in athletics, and then I was a personal trainer for a number of years after the easy transition to try and go towards more of the sciences is to use my athletic background to help people get fit, and obviously there was a bias at that time where everyone needs to exercise, you need to make sure you maintain great cardiovascular fitness, and I would still recommend this. What I do for individuals is I act as an overseer and a consultant to what they can do within their portion of their life if they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And I work with individuals that want to live long, and if they have never developed a cardiovascular system, we take a look at what's going on in the next 3 to 7 years of their life, and we plan out that portion to say, how are we going to build out a strong cardiovascular system? So we can really focus in on a portion of a period to build up the system. But once we built it up, now that it's pretty simple, we want to maintain and we want to enjoy it. And so for that part, it doesn't require as much, call it effort, but it requires consistency. And I'm not delusional when I recommend exercise, whether people are going to do it or not. So right away, I have to come with an understanding of, are they willing to actually participate in this? And it's very easy to tell. There's the high motivators, high achievers. There's the sort of the mid of the line where they'll try to do it, but they'll fall off the wagon. There's some that are extremely low motivated. And so this is why I first say the baseline is what would you have to do in order to help push your disease over with exercise? What would you have to do? And it's very simple: is walk 3 times a day, right? Solid 20 to 40-minute walk. You can do it 3 times a day. And in order to force yourself, if you're a low motivator, go get a dog. You will have to walk that dog at least twice a day, and hopefully on the good days you can do 3. Now, if you're motivated and you want to go a little bit more, what I recommend is for anyone that's over the age of 50, 55, to really heavily focus on strength training over anything else. And that has a lot to do with, I did my portion of my doctorate on the blood profiling of exercise. And so really what I've learned is that if you're old, maybe this is the best way. As we get older, if we do the cardio aerobic exercise, it's just pumping blood through the pipes. You're just moving blood around. But when we load our joints with weight, with resistance, when we acute loading of the joint, we get the muscle to do a growth response, a trophic response. And those growth factors are phenomenal in terms of helping our metabolism, helping our longevity, in the nighttime helping signal neurogenesis in brain protective molecules, one called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so the resistance exercise pushes us over a threshold so that we respond with a very positive response in our blood.
Before you continue watching this episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to book a call with me. If you are looking for personalized support to manage diabetes effectively and take control of your health, visit wellnessimpact.org to schedule your call today. Back to the episode.
And so how often do we need to do the resistance exercise? How much? Well, a little bit every day was great, but once to twice a week where we push over ever so slightly into our comfort zones, that's where we want to, make it. And I can say some arbitrary, hey, you need to do about 40 minutes, take an exercise, do 10 reps. But the reality is that everyone needs to be looked at and kind of given a personalized goal to reach that's just slightly above what they're comfortable with, right? And this is where, I've worked with individuals and ladies that they're having difficulty doing 10 squats. And so getting them to do 10 pretty much put their butt in the couch, stand up 10 times is a challenge. And so that's where you start. You start with that. And what you don't want to do is burn out. That's one very easy thing to do with exercise is ask someone to do too much too fast. They get sore, they get unmotivated, they miss a day because they're reluctant to push into that pain, and now they stop doing it. Now they feel bad, and it puts them into a vicious cycle. And so this is where the walking becomes very, I think, a great achievable goal that once we keep hitting it, then it's easier to move into a little bit more of the different types of exercise and modalities. And, the more is not better, right? The right amount at the right time is really what's needed. And there's a very simple principle here. This is really what I've now tried to put even for the healthiest of the folk that want to live long, is that what you are is trillions of cells. And a portion of those trillion cells you have under voluntary control. You don't control your heart rate, with your conscious attention. You have to do it more through manipulating your muscle. But you are responsible with that voluntary control to contract every single one of your muscles. You are these 200 plus muscles that if you neglect, they're going to come back and they're going to say, hey, what's going on here? I'm going to atrophy if you don't contract me. And muscles are very simple. I love muscle physiology because their primary function and the only function is to contract. Just one way. In order for them to relax, another muscle must contract. And this is the biggest principle to relieve joint pain or problems with the musculoskeletal system, is to understand the antagonistic biomechanics around joints. And so if we have pain on one side, it's not to focus and massage and keep putting pressure on that pain. It's to work on the opposite side to strengthen it in order to give that side a ability to relax, extend, or to strengthen it. And so in today's day, we sit a lot. What's that going to result into? It's going to result into a shortening of our hip flexors. So right at the hip, that muscle is going to shorten. What's going to happen when we stand up? It's going to cause our hip to tilt. We're going to bend forward. So if we sit a lot, we really need to focus on our posterior chain of muscles, the butt, the hamstring, the calves, and the lumbar, the lower back. We need to just simply contract those. We need to bring movement and motion into those in order to not allow those hip flexors to contract so much. And the principle for our musculoskeletal health has massive implications to how we're going to mentally feel. If there's a constant tension in our muscles, it's going to have a very negative effect to motivation to do anything. It's going to drain our willpower. But as we bring that relaxation into the body, into the muscles, which we control, they're like batteries. It gives us ability to act in other aspects of our life. And we can see on the neurological level is that when we exercise, when I say exercise, walking, we activate parts of our brain that's then going to translate into everything else throughout the day. Meaning if we get a phone call that's about to upset us, we have a part of our brain that's active that otherwise wouldn't be if we hadn't exercised. And so this is a little bit of a joke where people say, I think the myth goes, we only use 10% of our brains. That came from the fact that only 1 in 9 of the brain cells are actually neurons, right? Everything else is supportive tissues. And so there's this sort of myth, if only we can use more of our brain. Well, we can, but it's not about using more neurons. It's about using different regions and activating them. And how do we do that? Well, we do that, for example, with exercise. We can do that with sauna and with cold exposure. When we put ourselves in those, what we do is we shift ourselves out of homeostasis and we ask our body to bring us back. We rise to the challenge. And when we rise to that challenge, then that translates into stresses of all kinds, social stresses, maybe from our boss, maybe from our loved ones, maybe from our grandkids. And that is using more of our brain. So that's how we'll get access to more of it. So I know that's a little bit of a runaround to your question,
Yes.
but hopefully a little fun.
Brilliant. Great information. Thank you for sharing that. So the two key points here are walking should be number one exercise that everyone must do. And the second one is weight training or resistance training, that is for the muscle and the bones as well. Great information. Thank you for sharing that. Just you mentioned the brain. I didn't go at that clearly. Let's talk for 1 minute about limiting beliefs and mindset. If you can touch a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, what I do quite a bit is having to go up against people's beliefs. People have a belief like, well, I need to eat in order to have energy. And that's limiting them to experience the whole health and vitality of life. There's freedom in being, call it, comfortable without eating constantly. And we often try to seek and avoid discomfort. But over just a little bit of discomfort comes really what we're meant to experience within life. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be very, very sharp with our cognition. We're not supposed to have these mental fogs that come in. And so the limiting beliefs, this is my bias, it's my personal kind of, it's what I have come to as a theory from interacting with people with all sorts of conditions, from lupus to Crohn's to diabetes, is that there is a belief that has now manifested into a physical condition. And that belief might be with food, that belief might be with activity, that belief might be with a compulsion that someone's constantly engaging in, saying, hey, this isn't bad for me, I can get away with this is good for me. And the notion of this is good, this is healthy, can be very dangerous because it puts us in a state of not listening to our body anymore. We have symptoms. Our body communicates to us in a very coordinated manner. And it's a weird thing to say our body and us, because I'm doing something which I try not to do, which is cause a duality between it. But throughout the years, there's quite a regard for the mind-body connection. And that's really what we do when we have these limiting beliefs, is that instead of quieting the mind and acting on what we feel, the feeling is absolutely paramount. We numb our feelings with our beliefs. We turn them off. We go against what our emotions and our feelings are telling us, and in so doing, start creating a inevitable condition that's going to force us to deal with it. And it's a difficult time, because often when someone has, the medical system has failed them, and they've tried different things and they aren't able to, push through what's really causing their problems, they're quite open to have their beliefs changed. They're looking for it, and I then have an easy time. But when I have to come in and let's say someone's asked me to talk to their loved one, it is unbelievably difficult in order for that person to come to grips with their beliefs. And this is where forgiveness and acceptance come as your emotional tools in order to get through these problems, is that you have to forgive yourself for making the mistakes. Even if you did them for years and you thought they were the right thing to do, or you were convinced, or you bought into someone's, call it, charlatan marketing, it's okay. It's completely okay. Now let's move on. And the limited beliefs, I find that is the bread and butter for health. When we can quiet the mind, get back to in tune with our body, reestablish the mind-body connection, we then can easily find what we need within our environment. We'll find the right people to talk to. We'll find the right herbals. We'll find the right, if we need drugs for the moment, we'll find drugs temporarily in order to help us become stable enough to find what we need in order to get back onto what I would say the absolute miracle and bliss of being a human being.
Brilliant. Very interesting information. Thank you for sharing that. I have got another question before we finish this episode. I know there are other things we didn't discuss when we are running out of time. My question here is, what inspiring message or advice would you like to leave with our viewers and listeners to motivate them or help them on their health journey?
Well, there's a lot, but in a weird way, what I would point people towards is to become impeccable with their language, to really, really be in tune with the words that they're putting out into the world. What they're saying is their internal dialogue is under constant vision, constant observation of that language. Is it serving you? Is it reflective of how you feel? Is it reflective of what you're trying to communicate? And that language is absolutely paramount because it's what separates us from the things that creep and crawl in the night. It allows us access into the future and the past, which can cause us a lot of trouble. And so being very, very good with our language also helps us navigate and get to a state of joy and bliss that you can't take away from an individual. You know, we suffer in this state. We inevitably we go through problems. But when we overcome those problems, when we can see that there is a way of well-being, when we can see that there's health, we all might come to it in a different way. You know, people have beat their diabetes through doing different tactics, different strategies. And in so doing, now they've gotten joy that no one can ever take away from them. It's their supremacy, their skill, their ability to overcome these challenges in life. And, you know, a disease is massive. That's a massive thing to regenerate and come back from. Beautiful. I love those stories. My favorite. But even something small, you know, the small tribulations that we face in a day-to-day, when we overcome those problems, no one can then take away that great feeling of success that comes with it, knowing now that we can tackle it anytime it comes. And so, mind your language. Consider whether the words that we're using are they the best way to describe at hand what we're seeing, and know that science is just a tool that we use in order to ever so slightly grasp at the unbelievable complexity that's in front of us. And I'll leave you with that.
Thank you for sharing your inspiring message. How can people find you if they want to get in touch with you or learn more about you and what you do?
My company is called Timeline Sciences. We are all experiencing the one timeline, and we use science to describe that timeline. So timelinesciences.com. If you email me, I will, of course, get back to you. You can sign up for the newsletter in which I give really the non-negotiables, the aspects that maintain and keep our health in proper order. And the other one that I use is the socials. If you feel more comfortable with social media, I'm on X, or currently known as Twitter. If you send me even a direct message, I'm happy to get in touch with you and be whatever you need as a research scientist or a coach. I've bridged the science and the coaching as my two favorite skills that I bring to the table.
And thank you for sharing your contact information. Now we have come to the end of this episode, and I would like to express my sincere gratitude for our amazing guest, Daniel Tausan. Is that correct?
You got it.
Yeah, brilliant. For sharing his expertise, insight, and time with us today. I also want to thank all of you, our dedicated viewers and listeners, for being part of this episode. If you need additional guidance or support, you can book a call with me at wellnessimpact.org. If you found today's episode insightful and helpful, I invite you to join our community of people committed to thriving with diabetes. Stay up to date coming episodes, empowering discussions, and practical tips. Make sure to subscribe and follow us. Once again, thank you, Daniel, for being our guest today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this impactful journey. Until next time, take care of your health and keep thriving.